everyone, today's tutorial is for these two peas in a pod, and they come out of their pods too. So a couple of cute ideas I've seen folks use for these whenever I've sold them at markets is maybe to give to a best friend. So you take one pea, they take the other. It could be for your significant other, or it could be for a young child in your life who maybe misses you during the day, and you can give them one of the peas from the pod and hold on to the other, and when they miss you they can give it a squish. So whatever you're making it for, I've linked all of the materials you're going to need in the description. So give that a quick look over and let's get started. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the sort of mintier color green and not the more of a lime green color for the peas that go inside of the pod. So we're going to be making two of these, and they're both made the exact same way. So we're going to begin by tying a magic loop. So we'll start with 5 inches or so of tail, make a finger guns here in our left hand, and then lay that tail over that finger guns and press it to the lower digit with our thumb. Then taking the working yarn, which is still attached to the ball of yarn, we'll wrap around the back and top of our two fingers, and then cross that over the yarn we've pinched with our thumb, and then pinch that yarn too, and then wrap around the back side, and then pinch that yarn as well. So if you look, you can see I have 2 wraps around the back sides of my fingers and crossed over on the underside of my hand. Then we'll take our crochet hook. We're going to go underneath that top loop and slide the bottom loop underneath that, then flip our hands back over and bring them together. And then using our thumb and index finger, we'll grab both the loop on our hook and the loop on our fingers, then let go and slide all of those loops off our hand. Then you can see I've got the tail of my yarn and my working yarn. I'm going to move my tail out of the way by moving it clockwise, sort of to like the 12 o'clock position. And then I'm going to take my working yarn and I'm going to bring it and put it over my left index finger. I also kind of like to hold the bottom of the yarn too with the rest of the fingers on my hand. And then before we let go with our right thumb and index finger, we're going to need to grab both the loop and the tail and kind of hold them so nothing comes undone. So I like to pinch underneath where my tensioned working yarn is by grabbing the tail and the loop there. Once you've done that, you can let go with your right index finger and thumb, and then by pulling your left index finger up, you can tension your yarn. Then you take your crochet hook and just pull that tensioned yarn right through, which locks your magic loop in place and gets you ready to add your first single crochet stitch. I also untangle this loop here, so the tail is kind of threaded through the loop. I like to bring it out and then over. And remember, with magic loop, we're going to work over both that tail and the loop itself. So we'll start by putting 6 single crochet stitches inside of this loop. So we'll form our first one by going under both of those strands, and depending on how you crochet, you may yarn under. I actually like to yarn over. It really doesn't matter whatever your preference is, but I'm going to go ahead and yarn over, draw through and up, yarn over again and draw, and draw through both. I also like to pull my first stitch over by tugging a little bit with the tail and with the magic loop. And then I'm also going to mark this stitch because it's my first stitch, so go ahead and slip a stitch marker in. I use a bobby pin. And then we're going to continue adding single crochet stitches to this magic loop. So here's my second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Once you have all 6 stitches added to your magic loop, you can do the magic part, which is to pull the magic loop tail, which closes our first round and preps us for round 2. So round 2, we're going to take our stitch marker out, and then we're going to increase in each stitch all the way around. So to increase with single crochet, all we need to do is put 2 single crochet stitches in the same place from the previous round. So here's my first stitch from round 1. I'm going to slip underneath both sides of the stitch, yarn over, draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through both. Mark that stitch since it's the first one of the round. And then repeat that same single crochet stitch, but I'm going to go through the same space that I went through last time. So I'm just going to push straight through again from front to back, yarn over and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through 2. Now that I've done that, I'm going to continue putting 2 single crochet stitches in every stitch all the way around, which will give me 12 stitches total at the end of this round. Alright, I've got all 12 single crochet stitches in my round. I'm going to pull my magic ringtail one last time. Then I'm going to snip it, not all the way off, but just shorter, so that it's out of my way for the next few rounds. Alright, so our next round, we're going to place 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of our round. And don't forget, we also need to mark that since it's the first stitch. And then in the next stitch, we're going to increase. So we'll put 2 single crochet stitches in the next stitch of the round. And then we're going to repeat that same pattern of 1 single crochet increase all the way around another 5 times for 6 repetitions total to wrap up this round. Alright, so for our last increase round, all we need to do is put 1 single crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches. So 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round, 1 single crochet in the next, and then an increase. And then we're going to repeat that same sequence another 5 times for a total of 6 repetitions all the way around the piece. Alright, I have made my last increase, so for the next 4 rounds, all we'll need to do is put 1 single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around. So make sure you move your marker up each round that you do this. Then I will see you back here whenever I get a little closer to wrapping up the end of the 4th round. Alright, so I just wrapped up that 4th round of plain old single crochet, and I'm ready to start decreasing the piece body. So we're going to start by placing 1 single crochet stitch in the first 2 stitches of the round. So here's my first and my second. And then we're going to decrease, and the way that I like to decrease is I single crochet 2 together. So I'm going to go through my next stitch, yarn over and draw up a loop. I'm going to do the same thing in the next stitch, go through, yarn over and drop a loop. And then I'm going to draw through all 3 of the loops left on my hook. So you can see that makes it so that those 2 stitches come together into 1 stitch. So we'll repeat that same sequence another 5 times for a total of 6 repetitions all the way around the piece body. Alright, so that was my last decrease for that round. Next, we're going to do 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round, and then decrease next. So in the next 2, we're going to single crochet them together. And then we're going to repeat that same sequence, 1 single crochet decrease, another 5 times for 6 total until we're all the way around. Alright, so now we only have 1 round left of single crocheting to do. We're going to actually add the face details. So I like to take this last stitch and pull it up long so it doesn't come undone while I'm working. Then we're going to flip our P over so our stitch marker and the active loop are on the other side. And then our piece face is going to be on this side, perfectly centered between those 4 rounds of single crochet that we made. So it'll be 2 rounds above, 2 rounds below. We'll go ahead and count those together though. So we've got our first, second, third, fourth rounds, and then 1, 2. Right here, directly centered in the P's face, is going to be where the eyes go. So I'm going to be using these 14mm painted eyes, and if you would like to use the same ones, I've linked them in the video description, so check that out. A 14mm eye, or whatever size you like, will probably be okay too. Remember to take into account the fact that I'm using chenille yarn, so it's a little bit bigger. If you're using worsted weight, you may need to size the eyes down. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and slot the eye through the fabric of my pea's body. And then I'm going to put my eyes about 3 stitches apart. So I'm going to just count those stitches between the two. So 1, 2, 3, and then just to the outside. You can play around with the spacing though if you want them to be a little further apart, maybe 4 stitches instead of 3. Feel free to move the eyes as you see fit. Alright, once you're happy with their placement, go ahead and snap the little plastic backs that go on the back side of them on. Alright, once you've got the back snapped on, it's time to stuff the pea. And when you're stuffing, be careful not to accidentally stuff the active yarn into your pea's body. I have a bad habit of doing that sometimes, so I find it's good to remind myself. Then also be careful when you're stuffing, the eyes can get pushed by the stuffing itself. I'll sometimes have to hook my finger inside and just double check that the stems of the eyes are sitting so that the eyes are flush on the surface of my work. Alright, so once the pea is stuffed, we're ready to add our last round of single crochet. So we're going to go ahead and take our hook and reinsert it into that loop that we drew up long. And then tighten down by pulling our working yarn. And our last round, all we need to do is decrease in every stitch all the way around. So we'll end up with 6 stitches when it's all said and done. Alright, so I just did my last decrease, so I'm ready to fasten off. And to fasten off, we'll start by taking our stitch marker out, then placing a slip stitch in that stitch that a marker was just in. So to do that, we'll go from front to back, just like we would for a single crochet. Yarn over and draw through, and then just keep drawing through until we only have 1 loop on our hook. Then we'll cut ourselves a little bit of a tail. We don't need much, maybe 6 inches or so. And then we're going to pull our slip stitch all the way through. So just tug your hook away from your piece until your yarn goes all the way through your last loop. And then we're going to tighten that slip stitch down into a knot. And then we need to close off the bottom of the pea's body. So we're going to take that tail that we cut and we're going to thread the end of it through one of our yarn needles. If you're also working with chenille yarn, it does this thing where it sheds really badly. And sometimes if it sheds, it's hard to thread through. So I learned a cool trick. If you're having trouble threading your yarn through your yarn needle, fold it over the eye of the needle and pinch really tightly and just slip that up off of the needle itself. And then you can push that loop through the eye of your needle without having to worry about those weird frayed ends. I do love the chenille yarn, it's so soft, but it can be very messy to work with. Alright, so then we're going to take that yarn needle we've just threaded, and we're going to sew through each of the 6 remaining stitches left on our pea. I go through the front loop only, so if you look you can see both loops, like every crochet stitch has 2 loops. We don't want to go underneath both like we did when we were crocheting. We're only going to grab that front loop. And we're going to sew from bottom to top, whip stitching around each one of these front loops. So there's 2. And then very carefully we're going to pull so that that hole closes up. Chenille yarn's also very nefariously bad about breaking whenever you pull it too tight. So if you find it's really hard to pull this closed, sew your stitches nice and loose so that you don't have any breaking and fraying and tearing of hair and rending of garments. It's never fun. Alright, so then let's tie a surface knot and weave this tail in so we can finish up this pea. So to do that, we're going to loop our yarn over the surface of our work. And then taking our yarn needle, we're going to sew down through a little bit of the fabric of the work and then up through that loop. So I'm only catching maybe a stitch's worth of fabric. I'm going to pull that yarn needle until that loop starts to kind of close in around the tail here. I'm going to hold that loop really close to the body of my work until it ties a knot. Then we're going to weave this tail in by sewing underneath where that knot is, and then up through the body several rows above. And then I pulled that through and it pulls the knot on the inside. I'm going to weave this in one more time, so I'm just going to go through a couple of stitches of the body. Then when I've done that, I can unthread my tapestry needle and give that a snip. And you've completed your first pea. We need one more and then we can work on making the pod for the two of them. Alright, so I have both of my peas complete and I am ready to start in on the pod. So to do that, we're going to take the more concentrated, kind of a brighter green color, and we're going to begin by tying a slip knot because we're going to be chaining and working flat sort of for the pod. So the way I like to tie my slip knots, I tie them maybe a little differently than you've seen, so I'm going to walk you through how I like to do it. I like a longer tail because I'm going to weave that in as I work my chain. And then I like to fold that tail behind the working yarn so it's attached to the ball of yarn still. And if you look, I slip my fingers through that loop that I've made. You can slip your ring and middle finger through, or if you'd like, you can do your thumb and index finger. It doesn't really matter what fingers you decide to put through. So let me do that again. So once we've got that crossed behind, we're sort of tying a loop around our fingers. We're going to bring the tail in between those two fingers. So like crossing it over the loop that we've already tied. And then I'll grab both the working yarn and that loop, and I'm going to pull the working yarn and the tail while I pull the loop that I've crossed over my fingers through. So the reason I like to tie my slip knots this way is because they loosen whenever you pull on the tail and not when you pull on the working yarn. So let's tie one of those again together. Again, we're going to take the tail of our yarn and we're going to fold it behind our working yarn. And then we'll cross it over and I'll bring it in between those two fingers. And then we're going to pull it through that loop while also holding on to the working yarn. So I'm kind of just pulling that loop through. And that ties our slip knot. Once you've got that tied, we're going to go ahead and take our crochet hook, slip it inside, and then pulling the tail, we'll tighten it down onto our hook. And we'll begin by chaining 18 stitches total. Alright, so I have 18 stitches chained. And then we're going to begin working with double crochet stitches down the chain. So we chained 18. We actually need to use 3 of those to turn our work. So we're going to go ahead and yarn over, so just wrapping the yarn around our hook. And then we're going to go through not the first or the second, but we're going to be in the 3rd chain from our hook. So we'll go through and then yarn over again, draw up a loop, yarn over, draw through 2, yarn over and draw through everything left. So if you look, we technically have 2 double crochet stitches done. Those stitches we skipped count as our first stitch. I'm going to mark this one just so it's a little easier for us to see whenever we head back this direction. So let me go ahead and mark that. So there's our first stitch of the row, and then here's our second. Then we're going to continue double crocheting down this chain. So here's my 3rd double crochet. Alright, so I've reached the slip knot that I tied, which is my last double crochet stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and make my last double crochet. And then we're going to start working in the round by flipping over and working down the other side of the chain. But we need to do it pretty tightly. We're not going to actually be putting any chains or turning stitches. So to do this, we'll go ahead and yarn over and get ready to make your next double crochet. And then we're going to put it on the other side of that slip knot that we tied. So I'm going to just push it through sort of the other side of the slip knot. I also like to work the tail in as I go, so I'm going to go ahead and put the tail over my hook as well. Then I'll yarn over, draw through the fabric of the work, yarn over and draw through 2, yarn over and draw through 2. And that is the first stitch on that side of the chain. So as you can see, your work's going to kind of pull itself closed really quickly because we didn't add any extra stitches. So this pod's going to be fairly flat. We're going to continue working though, so we've already got our first double crochet in that slip knot. So we need to work down the other side of the chain. So I'm going to go through that next stitch on the other side. And I'll just keep working down the back side of the chain, taking that tail with me so I don't have to weave it in later. Alright, so here is the last chain on the other side here. And if you look, it's actually the stitch that we use to turn our work. So it looks suspiciously like a chain, and it is a chain, but it's a part of that first stitch that we made. So you can see I've got my stitch marker in here. We're going to slip stitch, so we're not working in either of these chains because they're a stitch technically. We're going to slip stitch to that first stitch that we marked, which is why we mark it. And then we'll take that stitch marker out. We're going to chain 2 loose stitches. Then we'll work our first stitch right above the first stitch of the first round. So go through, double crochet, and then we're going to mark that chain 2 that we made to start this row. So we're going to just continue working around, putting double crochets in every stitch of this round, and then slip stitching to the chain that we made to build the height to start our round. So let's work this round together. Alright, so we're here on the other side, really close to our stitch marker. And one of the things I feel like I dislike about double crochet a lot of the time is that it's hard to tell if this is a stitch I need to work in or if this is the stitch that I already worked out of whenever I chained, which is why I like to mark this stitch. So if you kind of follow that chain back, you can see that's where we slip stitched last round. So we don't want to put another double crochet here. We want to slip stitch these two together to start our next round. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to slip stitch to the top of that chain 2 that we made. And then we're going to repeat that same pattern of chaining 2 and then double crocheting all the way around another 2 rows. It's going to be 4 rows total of double crochet. So I'll go ahead and get started by chaining 2, and then of course marking that second chain so that I can tell where I need to slip stitch next round, and then making a double crochet stitch coming out of the first double crochet from last round. So I will catch you back here whenever I've wrapped up that 4th round of double crochet. Alright, so you can see that I have finished my 4 rounds of double crochet, and if you look you can see this is formed sort of like just a little pouch. So the peas are going to wedge inside of here, but we need to add a few more rounds of stitches to the top. So I like to do 2 rounds of single crochet at the very top of my pod as well. However, if you want to kind of see how your peas look with just the double crochet, now's a good time to kind of wedge them in there. And if you like how they look with just double crochet, you can fasten off here. I actually prefer to have the single crochet at the top though, because it helps the pod stay in place. So let's go ahead and make those 2 rounds of single crochet. We'll start by chaining just 1 stitch this time. And I'm not going to mark this 1 stitch that I've chained because we're going to sort of spiral around here. So I'm going to go ahead and place my first single crochet stitch. And I'll mark that one so I can keep track of my round. So I've marked that single crochet. I'm just going to keep working around, putting a single crochet stitch in every double crochet stitch from the past round. Alright, I'm all the way around. Here's that chain 1 that I made. I'll go ahead and work in that as well. Then we're ready to start our last round of single crochet stitches. So I'm going to take my marker out, place a single crochet in the stitch the marker was in, remark, and then just continue working around, putting 1 single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around. Alright, I'm in my last stitch. I just worked my last single crochet, so we're ready to fasten the pea pod off. We'll take our marker out, and then we're going to slip stitch to the stitch that our marker was just in. And then we're going to cut ourselves a little bit of a tail so that we can weave in. So maybe 5 inches, 6 inches. And we're going to pull that last slip stitch all the way through, and then tighten down. And then if you're like me, you wove this tail in as you went from your slip knot. If you didn't, you're gonna need to weave this in. So we'll practice weaving it in together, even though I've got mine woven in. So I'm gonna start here by threading that slip knot tail through the eye of my tapestry needle. And then to weave this one in, we're gonna just sew along the inside of the piece. I like to catch a few stitches from each. When you've done that, you can snip the tail. And then to weave in the outside, the tail that we just cut, we're going to once again thread the tail through our tapestry needle. And then I like to weave mine in down along the inside of the pea pod. So I like to catch it in the single crochet stitches because they're really tight. So I'm going to go through just the single crochet brim that I made here around the edge of the pea pod. And then I'm going to sew along the inside of the single crochet stitches that I made. Sort of make it an L shape whenever I weave this in. Now that's woven in, I'll give it a snip. And then we're ready to put our peas inside of the pod. As you can see, that single crochet sort of cocoons them inside of the pod. So I really recommend doing that single crochet border on the outside of the pod. Alright, so that wraps up this tutorial for these 2 peas in a pod. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, thank you for watching.